Welcome back to the Live Open Daily podcast, coming at you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Going through all the news that's fit to print about virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, extended reality, even though those encompass all three of the other ones, but all kinds of realities. Let's get to it. Top story, I'm going to eat some crow about PlayStation VR2 because I got something completely wrong. PlayStation announced on the blog today that the PlayStation VR2, which they previously announced was going to have PC access, will have that via an adapter. It looks like a breakout box from the old PSVR1 to be able to directly plug your PSVR2 into your PC. I got this completely wrong because when I first heard about this news about a month or so ago, I was convinced that it was going to be just what they put out on Quest, which was just going to be a Steam Link application that you could download to your PlayStation 5. And then that application would run on your PS5, connect to your PC, pull the game from your PC wirelessly into your PS5, and then from your PS5, that would do all the processing and send it to your headset. I thought it would just be a software solution, just like they released on Quest. I was completely wrong. Instead, we're getting this adapter. I'm going to go through the blog post here. It's pretty short, so I'll just read the whole thing. When PlayStation VR2 launched last year, we were thrilled to introduce PS5 players to a new generation of VR games with innovative gameplay and immersive sensory features. Inspired by a passion to bring gamers even more content options, we've been working to enable access to additional games on PC, complementing the diverse PSVR2 games lineup available on PS5. Today, we're happy to share that we'll be rolling out this support on August 7th. Players will have access to buy and play Steam's expansive library of thousands of VR games, including fan favorites like Half-Life Alyx, Fallout 4 VR, and War Thunder. To start, players will need to purchase a PlayStation VR2 PC adapter, which will be available for an estimated retail price of $60 USD at selected retailers and directPlaystation.com where available. Players will also need a commercially available DisplayPort cable sold separately that's compatible with DisplayPort 1.4, as well as a Steam account and a PC that meets the minimum requirements below. I'm not going to read the minimum specs. If you've ever messed with any PC VR stuff, you know what the min specs are for a PC. This doesn't look to be anything different. For the video version for people watching this on YouTube or the video on Spotify, I will put this graphic up, but I'm not going to go through this. Setup is easy. Simply connect PlayStation VR2 to your PC using the PSVR2 PC adapter and the DisplayPort 1.4 cable. Then download the PlayStation VR2 app and the Steam VR app from Steam. This will allow you to set up PlayStation VR2 on your PC, customize your settings and play area, and start purchasing and playing games in Steam VR. As with all PC gaming technology, performance may vary depending on your PC setup, including system compatibility and the quality of your DisplayPort cable. Please ensure your setup meets the minimum requirements. Steam VR titles also have individual system requirements, so please refer to the game information on Steam. Then they went to the differences on what PSVR2's experience will be on PC versus what it is currently on PS5, and this is where things kind of took a turn for the worse. PSVR2 was designed from the ground up specifically for PS5, so you'll notice that some features like HDR, headset feedback, eye tracking, adaptive triggers, and haptic feedback other than rumble are not available when playing on PC. However, other high fidelity and sensory immersion features of PSVR2 are included, including 4K visuals, 2000 by 2040 per eye, 110-degree field of view, finger touch detection, and see-through view, aka pass-through, as well as foveated rendering without eye tracking. They made point to say that without eye tracking, and 3D audio in supported games. The 3-star caveat here says that 3D audio experience uses Steam VR's audio technology instead of Tempest 3D audio tech, which is only supported on PS5. While the most immersive way to experience PSVR2 gaming remains on PS5, we hope players will enjoy the ability to play an expanded lineup of VR games on PC using the same headset. You can check out Steam's huge library of multiplayer, open world, survival horror, and stealth action games, sports sims, puzzlers, and free-to-play fan favorites on the Steam store. The last bit here says there's $100 off the PSVR2 and the PSVR2 Horizon Call of the Mountain bundle until June 12th. And go to their website for more information about that. So a lot to unpack here, a whole lot to unpack here. I'm just going to scroll back through one of the highlights. Okay, so let's start with the differences. Number one, you're not going to get HDR. You're not going to get headset feedback, meaning the headset haptics. A lot of people who have PSVR 2 are very happy with that. The eye tracking, which means that dynamic foveated rendering using eye tracking is not going to be able to be used. Anyone who wanted to use this headset for like social experiences like VR chat, where eye tracking is, or any kind of extended body tracking, eye tracking, face tracking, body trackers on your body, your hips, your elbows, things like that. Additional tracking in VR chat is huge. That's not going to be a thing. The adaptive triggers, if you don't know what those are, whenever you squeeze like a PlayStation 5 or PSVR2 controller in like a shooter, if let's say your gun is overheating or there's some resistance to it, like if you're pulling the arrow taut on the bow, the trigger will start to become harder to pull, which is another way to enhance the immersion. You really see that if you play shooters on PSVR2. And then haptic feedback other than rumble. So the PlayStation VR2 controllers has spot haptics where like certain areas of the controller will rumble depending on what's happening in the game. Again, it's another immersion feature that gets lost when you're on PC VR. So if you strip all that stuff down, you're still getting a pretty high resolution headset. You're getting a much wider field of view, and you're getting OLED panels all in the package that's going to cost you about, with this adapter and tax, I'm going to say somewhere around $650 for a PCVR headset that also works with your PS5. I'm kind of torn on this. Number one, I think this is a value add. I don't think this is going to sell like a million units or millions, plural of units. But what this does is this gives this headset parity with the Quest 3. Even if you didn't care about standalone VR gaming, if you bought the Quest 3, you were still getting a decently high resolution headset with pancake lenses for less than $700, depending on which model you bought. Adding this feature to PlayStation VR 2, number one, still keeps it in the same price range, just like the top end Quest 3. The higher end Quest 3, the one with 512 gigabytes of storage, is $650. And you're not going to get any headset under $1,000 that has OLED panels and has these features that I think are going to come later. Even though they're not available now, I think at some point Sony may unlock the ability for developers to use eye tracking. That'll make it instantly a appealing option for like the VR chat crowd. And like they said in the blog, this opens up the entire library of Steam VR. They specifically mentioned Half-Life Alyx in this list, Fallout 4 VR. They're capitalizing on the fact that the Fallout show is very popular right now. War Thunder is kind of an interesting selection when they go about the third game that they're going to list as you can get the fan favorite. But number one, maybe I'm just not involved with War Thunder enough to know how popular it is. And number two, I can't think of a third PC VR game off the top of my head that I would recommend to people that is actually well known outside of VR circles. Whereas Alyx, because of the Half-Life legacy, still has some kind of cachet with that crowd. And so does Fallout 4. I maybe would have mentioned Skyrim, even though vanilla Skyrim is borderline unplayable and you need mods for it. I probably still would have mentioned Skyrim over War Thunder. I think that's a good example. The other thing that makes this a good value proposition, at least in my book, is if you're someone like me, I don't own the PlayStation 5. So even though people were saying that 550 was actually a pretty decent bargain for the PSVR 2, and I actually don't disagree with that, for people like me who don't own a PS5, the upfront cost for me is $950 because I was going to have to buy a $400 PlayStation 5 and then the $550 PSVR 2. That didn't represent enough value for me, given that a lot of that library I can play on other systems and there weren't enough exclusives. What this does is remove that $400 barrier of entry there. So now I'm just paying the 600. Well, after the adapter, it's about 300 some odd dollars. So I'm still paying as much for the PSVR 2 as I would have paid for my Quest 3, or I did pay for my Quest 3. I bought the 512 gigabyte version, so I paid $700 for my Quest 3. This puts it on the same range of that, which makes this a little bit easier to swallow. Having said that, for me personally, and this is just me talking, I still don't see the value in this, just because I'm looking at this and I look at what am I really gaining here? I'm gaining OLED panels, but I'm taking a step backwards with Fresnel lenses. After going back on my Quest 2 I mentioned this on the podcast yesterday, that put my Quest 2 back on to play some of Asgard's Rat's new update for Quest 3. And everything from like the small sweet spot to just the blurriness and the motion blur when I was turning my head too fast. I have a very large IPD, it's 72. Long story short, Fresnel lenses just don't really do it for me anymore. Every time I put on the headset with Fresnel lenses, I notice it right away, and I keep having to like adjust the headset to get it just right. The pancake lenses really help with that, and I find that I miss that. So the other thing is Mura, and this is something that comes with OLED panels. This is something that's been pointed out over and over again whenever people talk about PlayStation VR 2. A friend of mine who does another podcast with me, Hey Call Me Clay, is in the middle of playing Resident Evil 4 Remake in VR on PSVR 2 right now. And he keeps mentioning the Mura over and over and over again. It's like you can't unsee it. Different people are sensitive to different things. For me personally, my triggers are bad frame rates and low resolution. I can't deal with that. When I got the chance to demo the PlayStation VR 2 at my friend's house last summer, and then again at a con I went to a couple of weeks ago, at my friend's house, I played Horizon Call of the Mountain and Resident Evil Village, and I played a little bit of Gran Turismo. And then at the con over Memorial Day weekend, I played Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I noticed it immediately. It wasn't even like I was looking for it. I just noticed this grain, and I had to come out of it. And one of the attendants said, "Oh, you saw the Mura too, huh?" Like he knew exactly what I was talking about without me even having to describe it. The other thing we're gonna have to wait on is how well the software works. I've now used multiple different headsets for PCVR. I've used the DPVR E4, I've used the Pico 4, I've used MetaQuest 2, MetaQuest 3, and a Rift S. In 3 of those instances, I've used either QuestLink or AirLink. I've also used Virtual Desktop. I've used Steam Link. I've used Pico's proprietary software, the streaming assistant, and I used the streaming assistant for DPVR E4. And all those have varying degrees of performance and stability in those. QuestLink was actually really, really buggy until about a year ago. And it still feels like whenever there's a new OS update for Quest, something breaks in AirLink and I have to go back and fix it. Hopefully the software is stable. We actually don't know who's manufacturing it, whether it's Sony making the software or whether that's Valve making the software for them, like they did for Steam Link for Quest. But we won't know that until it's available in August. And lastly is the PlayStation account. I'm only bringing this up because this was a massive controversy with Helldivers 2 recently, where that game started to be sold, and then about 6 months after it came out, Sony announced that you were going to require a PlayStation account to be able to sign up for and use that software. Well, there's 170 countries that don't offer PlayStation accounts. So after a massive fan uproar and a whole lot of backlash, that game was downvoted like crazy. It got a bunch of negative reviews on Steam as people were just review bombing it. Sony backed off that requirement and said, okay, you don't need a PlayStation account to be able to play Helldivers 2. But what they did was they delisted that game in 170 some odd countries that do not have access to a PlayStation account. So now there are a ton of countries that can't play Helldivers 2. Ghost of Tsushima just launched on PC last week, and it is also being sold in that 170 countries that do not have access to Sony PlayStation accounts. Is this software going to require a Sony PlayStation account? Because that may be a deal breaker for people. Or if you live in a country where you imported your PSVR2 through whatever means you got to buy because you couldn't buy it directly, now you're not going to have access to this if you want to use it for PC. If Sony goes that route, and I don't know that yet, I'm just speculating based on recent history, that's going to cut out some people who may have wanted the headset in the first place. So right now we're kind of like a wait and see pattern. I personally know I'm not going to buy one because, again, this isn't enough of a value add for me, but it is a value add for the headset and it gives it parity with the Quest 3. Even though the negative speculation I think is warranted, we'll see how it looks like on August 7th. A lot of people are saying this looks like Sony is officially giving up on the PSVR 2. Honestly, and I said this in yesterday's pod, Sony's got this weird habit of trying to make everything proprietary to PlayStation 5 at first, like a lot of their first party titles, the Horizon games, The Last of Us, the Spider-Man games, now recently Ghost of Tsushima, and then they'll circle back and put it on another platform at a later date. Even though this is hardware and not software, this feels kind of like the same thing. Hey, we're going to make this piece of hardware, this PlayStation VR 2, PlayStation 5 exclusive for a while to get you to buy PS5s and hopefully move some units, and then we'll circle back and make it available on other platforms. My hope is that this means they're eventually going to port games like Horizon and the VR mode for Resident Evil Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake over the PC as well. Time will tell on that because all 3 of those games use eye-track dynamic foveated rendering, and since there is no eye-tracking access on the PC, that's going to require some hoops to jump through to make that happen. Second topic, Mark Zuckerberg announced on Instagram that Meta Connect is going to be September 25th and 26th. This is their big shareholder show pretty much, very similar to Apple's WWDC, where they roll out all the new things that they're going to talk about, all their new tech, all their new software, things like that. Last year, they talked a whole lot about Llama. They had these like celebrity AI models. There was like Snoop Dogg being your D&D Dungeon Master. They also did a whole lot on Quest 3 and on their new Meta Ray-Bans. With a fantastic presentation. I'm completely blanking on who did that presentation for Meta, but she was fantastic and she sold a ton of sunglasses that day. What we don't know is whether or not we're going to get a metagaming showcase. These started in 2021. This was a nice change because before that, before 2021, Connect would also be somewhat of a short gaming showcase where they would show a couple of titles that they had coming, and then they would get back into the hardware and all the shareholder stuff. Having the gaming showcase separately, and it was always in the summer. Last year was the day Quest 3 was announced. They did the gaming showcase later that day, and that's where we learned about Asgard's Wrath 2. It was nice to give a showcase devoted specifically to VR, because you don't see a lot of those. You have the one from Meta, you have the 2 that Upload VR do every year, and then the guys from the Rough Talk VR podcast did one last year. SideQuest occasionally does them, but having Meta, a major company, do a showcase that was dedicated to VR was really nice to see. I'm still hoping we get a metagaming showcase, especially since Meta owns 9 different studios, and we know Batman's coming, but we don't know what the other studios are working on. We know some of them, like Beat Saber is about to put out another free OST. The Population 1 new map drops a few days from now. I'll have coverage of that on Friday. But we don't know what like Downpour Interactive, the makers of Onward, are doing. We don't know what Armature Studios, they did the original Quest port of Resident Evil 4. We don't know what they're up to. We don't know what Ready at Dawn, that's the Lone Echo Games and Echo VR. We don't know what they're up to. They said they were shutting down Echo VR to make room for their next major project that they need more resources for. And then Meta laid off over half of that team, so we don't know what they're working on. Hopefully we still get a showcase. This is June 4th as I'm recording this podcast, and we still don't know yet. So fingers crossed, but if not, I'm sure we'll get a lot of gaming info at MetaConnect. These last two stories are updates for existing games. I don't think enough games get coverage for their existing updates and when they put out new content and new features in games. Like a lot of people talked about the new Population 1 map that's dropping later on this week. So I want to take a few minutes whenever these updates come out, because I know the developers could absolutely use as much coverage as possible, because stuff like this tends to fly under the radar. The first one is a Quest 3 update for Sweet Surrender. If you don't know what Sweet Surrender is, I'll just read the description from the blog entry. It is a roguelite first-person shooter set in a dystopian mega tower complex where you must adapt to a ruthless, fast-paced, action-packed environment featuring run-to-run progression and upgradable character classes. Sweet Surrender first dropped on Quest in September 2021. It's also available on Steam. Visually, the game uses cel shading, which I think looks absolutely fantastic in VR, whether it's on standalone or on PC. Other games like Jurassic World Aftermath, the Jupitergrad games really pop in that cel shading style. But for this game specifically, and this update addresses it, so I'm going to say this out front, I thought the colors were a little dull. Like, it still looks nice and it still looks pretty clean. Everything looks crisp, but nothing really popped. Like, there wasn't good lighting there. Everything was just a very, very dull, like, coat of paint. Which brings us to this update, and I'm going to read some more from the blog entry here. Update number 10, Resurrection, is a full graphics overhaul specifically targeting Quest 3 and Quest 2 that introduces a ton of new visual enhancements in addition to more content. There is a video for this. If you're watching this on YouTube or the video version on Spotify, the video will be up as I read through the list of what they've added. Bloom and HDR support for more eye-popping graphics, hundreds of brand new visual effects, refined horizontal recoil for better gun feel. Thank God, I'll talk more about that in a second. Total revamp of the final boss encounter. Again, the final boss was way too easy. Removal of insta-death on void glitch, a new unstuck button is needed, improved bug reporting tools, and dozens of other bug fixes and performance enhancements. For me, this update was long overdue. Number one, if you're playing a roguelite, the worst thing you could do in the game that has permadeath involved in it is insta-death. If you can just be one shot and just taken out just like that. There were areas of the game where like you could accidentally step into like a lava field and you would die immediately. And then, like they said here, there's something called the void glitch that would kill you immediately. So if you just went through a whole run and spent hours trying to get to the top of, you're climbing a tower in this game. If you spent the whole time trying to climb to the top of that tower and then you just get one shot and you're dead, that is really, really frustrating in the roguelite that you can't get that back. And then the recoil for the better gun field. The recoil on the guns, frankly, was bad. Just trying to two-hand guns, if you shot, like the recoil just went all over the place and you couldn't even compensate with arm position because you didn't know how the recoil was going to behave. I have now played this update and I can say that the recoil is much better. I still think the pistol is the best gun in the game, especially when you apply buffs to it, like more ammo or more power to it. You get these little upgrade chips, and as you're walking through a level, you can find these in like chests and things like that, and you can apply a chip to your wrist, and that will apply to whatever gun you're holding in that hand. You can hold up to 2 power-up chips per gun that can either, again, give you more ammo, more damage, the ability to stun, things like that. But the recoil got so bad, and since you have buffs on each hand, you were better off two-handing pistols than using something like a shotgun that you had to hold with 2 hands. So good on them for fixing the recoil. And then back to the visual part of it, the game just looks so much better now. I talked earlier about how everything just looked really flat, and even though like the lines were crisp and everything just appeared sharp, there was no, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. It just looked bland when you went through the environments, and especially since this game kind of has a problem with repeating environments really quickly, especially in the first area of the game. Adding lighting and things like that just made the game pop a lot more, made things feel a little bit more alive, even though you're running through a tower full of robots. It's really hard to explain. Hopefully the video does this justice, but if you own this game, go ahead and check out the update. It is well worth your time. There's also a new graphic setting menu where you can adjust bloom and special effects strength and switch between visual profiles to get the right balance for your own preferences. I hope that more games that do Quest 3 updates make it a point to give you the ability to adjust them up and down, whether you can set your resolution like in NASCAR's Wrath 2. The Light Brigade has an excellent set of options where you can set something for like visual versus performance. Again, this is something you see in PC gaming, and I don't want it to be an all or nothing thing. I want you to be able to turn things on and off because maybe your headset's low on battery and you don't want to do more consumption by turning those effects on. Maybe there's areas in the game where the frame rate is kind of lagging that the developers miss, and you need to turn some options off to be able to get better performance and better frames per second out of it. I love that they gave you the option to be able to adjust this, and especially when you're talking about things like bloom and special effects, some people can be susceptible to stuff like really high bloom or like flashing lights, particle effects, things like that. So being able to turn that stuff on and off, I think is a smart move. So overall, really fantastic update. They did a great job with this. It's honestly not my favorite game. I don't really like roguelikes all that much. There'll be a whole other podcast about that pretty soon. But in terms of updating this game to take advantage of the Quest 3 and even the Quest 2, they did a fantastic job. Knocked it out of the park. And the other update is for Guardians Frontline. If you're not familiar with Guardians, it is a very heavily Halo-influenced shooter with real-time strategy elements. The developers in the early times, back when they were on App Lab and SideQuest, said they were big fans of games like StarCraft and Halo, and they want to kind of bring those two elements together. The game has a full story campaign and PvP. It did previously get a Quest 3 update. I'll cover that in another video. This update is called the Queen update. You can just run through the list here. This is now available on Quest and on Steam. The new stuff, the Queen. The Federation has found a new enemy on a remote planet known as the Queen because of her big size. This enemy has weak points that should be targeted for a quick death, head and tail. Attacking other areas will take considerably longer. And then the bugs, I think that's Nidus tunnels. The enemy has now built its own portals. They can navigate using these portals from an entrance to an exit. These entrances and exits can be destroyed with explosives, but they regenerate. To permanently destroy the tunnel, you must destroy both the entrance and exit. And this next one kind of put me off a bit. Support the game. A new control panel in the spaceship allows you to support the developers by purchasing a package of interesting items, research points. That's how you actually get permanent buffs in the game, minerals, and exclusive avatars. While this is completely optional, the developers will be grateful for any support as it helps sustain the game's development. It's a loot box. Just call it a loot box. That's all it is. This doesn't really make me jump for joy. I don't really like seeing microtransactions in paid games like this. Because this, even though it's just one box, kind of feels like a slippery slope where there's something that they can just constantly upgrade, saying, hey, we added new minerals, we added X number of research points, you get a bonus on research points if you buy it this week. We got this avatar, here's this other exclusive avatar, now we have this one you can only bid for one day only. They're trying to create that FOMO to generate more revenue. I really don't like that practice of microtransactions, which is why I tend to stay away from games who do that stuff. So I'm not thrilled to see that here, but we'll see how they handle that moving forward. You also get 18 new weapon skins, a black energy sword skin, and if you're into doing like map making and achievements, they've added some new achievements for PvP. They've added some new options if you choose to make a custom map. There is a custom map maker in the game. It's actually pretty cool. And general quality of life updates, like for instance, they added new volume selectors to the settings menu for weapons volume and voice chat. Again, things like that. This update is free other than the loot box I talked about a minute ago. But the skins are now available. I'll put the graphic of that on the screen right now if you're watching the video. So go check out Guardians Frontline. If you haven't popped into it in a while and you own the game, hopefully this new content brings you back. That's a wrap for this episode of the Live Open Daily Podcast. Thank you very much for checking it out. If you want to support the pod, you already know what to do, but I'll say it anyway. Like, comment, share, subscribe, tell all your friends about it, and I will talk to you tomorrow.